So, Marie Wheatley, welcome to the Forbidden Knowledge podcast.
Thanks for having me, Billy.
Yes, it's been a while since I saw you. I think the last time I saw you in person was in Blackpool in the UK, if I'm correct.
That's right. It was Blackpool and Manchester. I saw you last time
Ah,
in Manchester.
yes, that was the last time. Manchester, that's right. Yeah, great event. You did a phenomenal job speaking there. And by the way, congratulations on a lot of your recent success. I'm starting to see you pop up everywhere now. I recently saw that you did an interview with Regina Meredith at Gaia. How'd that go?
Oh, that was amazing. She let me
Yeah.
speak about the latest research to do with ancient sites. And she's a very good interviewer. So that was amazing.
Yeah, she's one of the best. I mean, she literally does her research and she knows how to draw out of you exactly, what she wants, what she knows that the fans want to hear and that the listeners want to hear. And she also lets you speak. A lot of interviewers, sometimes they don't really let you make the point you're trying to make. And I think that she does a great job letting you speak. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So today we're going to talk a little bit about several things going on in the UK, and I'd like to hear any new research you have as well. But I want to start off with Stonehenge. I know that Stonehenge is a very enigmatic, incredible place. There's been a lot of incredible historic things that have happened there, a lot of eyewitness accounts of things that have happened there. Do you want to talk a little bit about Stonehenge and the alignments that you know of there, and maybe some of the parts of Stonehenge that people just don't hear about in the mainstream?
Absolutely. I mean, my research has taken me down some corridors to reveal what I call the secret history of Stonehenge, which is the title of my latest book. For instance, Stonehenge is surrounded by what's called long barrows. Long barrows are the very early part of the Stonehenge story, and they contained a very enigmatic, long-lost civilization. And I discovered that these people had long skulls. They had elongated skulls, for example, and their femur bones showed that they were actually quite short. They were not the giants that many other researchers have seen. That's only part of the history. Furthermore, when I was researching at Oxford University, I often study there, the anthropologist reports suggested that their ears were set further back, almost like fey-like, fairy-like in some way. So that was the very first start of Stonehenge, with the long barrows. And in the journey of looking into those long barrows, I think I discovered what many people would have said by Lloyd Pye would be a star child. And Lloyd Pye was very famous. You probably have heard of him, Billy, and the claim of the star child, for instance. Well, I think I found the equivalent in the Stonehenge environs. I gave the antiquarian description because the mound had been covered up, so to speak, to the doctor that worked with Lloyd Pye, and he said, yes, there are similarities, but in this case there was the whole skeleton, and it had a tail as well, and it was surrounded by long-headed people. This is unprecedented in the English landscape. So that was one of the most unusual burials. And what people don't know about Stonehenge, it went through various phases. So the phase that we're all familiar with, and your audience is familiar with, is called Stonehenge Phase 2. That was a kind of reconstruction of an earlier stone circle. And what I discovered in my research is there was 2 altar stones. That's excited a lot of my male colleagues, but I was the first person in modern history to recognize that. Also, there was another trilithon that was part of Stonehenge that was buried because it didn't fit the order by modern day archaeologists in 1930s. Now, a lot of people, Billy, say, why are a lot of stone circles, such as Stonehenge, aligned to a solar event like the midsummer sunrise, of which Stonehenge is famous? Well, it's not because we all sit around or stand around watching the sunrise above the heel stone in relationship to Stonehenge. What I found in my research is it's a long lost science and technology, and that's because the stones at Stonehenge, especially the 2 altar stones, have piezoelectrical qualities. And the sun at sunrise and sunset contains microwaves. It contains radio waves and also the long red wave of red light that we see at dawn and sunset. Well, the microwaves can be transduced, that means changed, when it passes through a piezoelectrical material, for instance, and it becomes pressure. Push pressure through an atmosphere like a stone and it becomes ultrasound. So what's happening at Stonehenge is the light of the sun is creating ultrasound, which I have recorded at several ancient sites, for instance. So there's a lot going on. And today people think it's just a visual event. And ultrasound can be used in healing and various other applications. But what I think is the crux here is that the elongated skulled people who have that exceptionally long skull that I photographed numerous elongated skulled people. I think their hearing perception could be different to ours because their ears are set further back.
That's incredible. Yeah, that would make a lot of sense. That maybe they have a different perception of hearing, that the ultrasound resonates differently with them, and maybe they can apply that frequency in different ways that we might not be, maybe we don't have an understanding of it right now, but maybe it applies to even their physiology. Maybe they were able to apply it better to themselves than to our physiology.
Oh, absolutely. And when I've recorded the standing stones themselves, for example, because I'm a second generation master dowser and I've inherited numerous manuscripts from other master dowsers, which sets me apart in the UK. And one thing that I noticed was that in the megalithic layout of ancient sites, standing stones that are rooted into earth energy, and not all are, but the ones that are pushed into that earth energy or a ley line or a grid line, they release sound again. And that's about 18 hertz we've recorded. And that's just below our ability to hear. So I think the megaliths at ancient sites literally absorb the earth energy. And I have actually proved it. They push out that energy at particular points, which again is around that 18 hertz frequency. We hear at 20. So this is not ultrasound, it's infrasound. So I think a lot of the ancients could hear infrasound and ultrasound. And some people that I've taken there have heard the vestiges of this.
That's crazy because, you know, I think elephants use infrasound and they can project their communications over many, many miles using infrasound in the jungle. So they can communicate from vast distances. So when you tell me that, now I'm thinking, who are they communicating with? Could they possibly be using infrasound to communicate with another civilization, village, or another capital somewhere else very far away to have that communication? Because infrasound is amazing for long distance communication.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's what they were doing. I think they were using it as a carrier wave. Okay. And that carrier wave could contain communication for facilities, for example. And that was one way of like being telepathic using this particular sound wave is not beyond the realms of possibility. So that's the kind of science behind Stonehenge as well. And during my research, I realized that the Neolithic probably built it, the elongated skulled people, but much later in the Bronze Age, orthodox dating, I actually think it's a lot older, but we're keep to the orthodox dating system. The much taller Bronze Age people came and they were buried in the round barrows that male brick colleagues of mine have studied, but they're much later. And what they did to Stonehenge is quite phenomenal. They started to dismantle it and change it, and even change the entrance to it is all in the archaeological record. So you had Stonehenge look in a particular way, and then archaeologists have always been baffled. Why did they change Stonehenge? Why did they uproot one of the stone circles and tinker with the design? It's because a different civilization, which were very, very tall, then started to redesign Stonehenge for their own particular identity.
Wow. I see this often, what you're talking about now. Civilizations inheriting something that was already there and then modifying it for their personal use. I think we see this in Egypt, where pharaohs, they stake a claim to pyramids or temples, put their name, put their cartouche inside. Even in the Valley of the Kings, they'll steal somebody else's tomb and put their name on it and say, okay, bury me here when I pass away. And then I think even the culture down in Mexico with Teotihuacan and the Chichen Itza civilization, the Mayans, I was told directly from archaeologists that went to university in Mexico and homegrown, guides, that the Mayans actually inherited what was already there, and they gave the name of the site, for example, to the Teotihuacans. They gave that name, but they themselves didn't really build these sites, and that's what's taught in those universities there. And it seems as if they also may have inherited these sites as well, and then of course utilize it for their own purposes, which makes a lot of sense, because the Mayans were like supposedly so sophisticated, but then they would rip your heart out of your chest while it was beating and eat it. That's crazy. Throw virgins in the well. So they were barbaric but sophisticated. It kind of never added up to me until I learned that they inherited what was there, just like many cultures have inherited things that were there. Just like in Cambodia at Angkor Wat, the king that they say built Angkor Wat, I believe he inherited it. He didn't even live that long, and the shorter period of time that they said it was built, it would be virtually impossible. So I think he inherited what was there, cleaned it up, added some inscriptions to it, and stake a claim to that site. Pretty interesting. Now, when you're looking at the stone, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. What I was just about to say is exactly that's what I think happened at Stonehenge. It's not just one story saying giants built it. It had a previous history that goes back in the archaeological record that we can find. And that's where I came in. I came in and said, okay, I am looking for all of these different artifacts to, piece together the story.
Yeah. Incredible. You've done an incredible job. When you look at the alignment with Stonehenge with the stars, what alignments do we see there?
Right. Well, one alignment that happened during Stonehenge Phase 1, that's even earlier than the Stonehenge that we all are familiar with the giant trilithons, for example. Stonehenge Phase 1 was a ditch and a bank, which we call a henge, which was brilliant white. So imagine that Stonehenge originally was surrounded by a 10-foot wall of chalk. You could not see what was on the inside. For example, in my dowsing and earth energy legacy, I had the reports of Stonehenge from the 1940s from the custodian that worked there for 25 years. He was very well respected. He was at the dig of the Henge Bank with the Professor Atkinson, who was excavating and restoring Stonehenge with all of those photographs of him using cranes and chains to put up some of the stone settings. But Richard Atkinson told the world, Billy, the Henge Bank was built of just chalk rubble. That was his statement to the world. But what Tom Gorey saw was that, in fact, the Henge Bank, which is a huge bank with a ditch on the inside, was actually carved out almost laser-like of the chalk bedrock. People think those stones are in the earth. They're not. They're in solid chalk. So there was this massive bowl carved out almost laser-like. That's the henge that surrounded Stonehenge, and it had a white floor with 56 blue stones going around. Above that, exactly at midnight on the spring equinox, the star alignment, you asked about star alignments, was to Corona Borealis. That's called the Northern Crown by the ancient Greeks. And to the ancient Celtic people and the Druids of old, for instance, Corona Borealis was the goddess of reincarnation. That would, a bit like in ancient Egypt, you've got the weighing of the feather, haven't you, against the heart to see if you had sinned or you hadn't sinned. It's a kind of a similar thing where you were looked at in your soul, and if you were, of a good character, so to speak, you would go to the pagan heaven, which was Corona Borealis, to wait to being reincarnated. So Stonehenge phase 1 was a reincarnation temple, and I was the guide to Dolores Cannon. She was very famous in America for past life regression, and I often discussed this with Dolores, and she agreed it is a temple of reincarnation dedicated to past lives. Again, is another phase of Stonehenge that people do not talk about, but the shame that happened under the directive of Professor Richard Atkinson is second to none in modern history. For instance, one of the trilathons, for those geeks out there, it's trilathon 51 and 52, if you want to go and look it up. On the outer face of that massive trilathon in the heart of Stonehenge was a hole about 2 feet deep. You could put your whole hand into that stone. And Tom Gorey, our custodian I mentioned of 25 years, respected by every single archaeologist, said this: no matter what the weather was, whether it was sunny, a drought, or windy, that hole would fill up with water miraculously. They didn't know where it came from. They got water diviners in, they got people to test the stone, and they didn't know. But what they did know was that it was miraculous. If you put it on your skin, it would cure eczema, the falling sickness, which is epilepsy. It's an old word for that, and lots of other ailments beside. So there was a healing stone at the heart of Stonehenge. Now, why isn't that visible today? It's because Professor Richard Atkinson filled that hole up with plastic and concrete. So we have lost the healing waters of Stonehenge, set above very powerful earth energies. And I've recorded and documented the alluvium deposits. That's when water falls, it makes its ingrained presence in stone, and I have filmed that and showed that yes, it's definitely water that was in that stone. It's not speculation, it was fact.
Wow, that is incredible. Did he have a reason why he sealed that hole? Is there any reason he just did it?
The Ministry of Works was the department of the government that used to look after Stonehenge. Today it's looked after by English Heritage and the National Trust, but that didn't exist in that era. It was our government that decreed that should be infilled.
Wow, that is wild. They're always trying to find a way to hide the incredible things from us. Is there any link to Stonehenge and other ancient cultures, like the cultures of Mesopotamia, the Inuna or the Anunnaki, or any other cultures within that area? Do you see any link between those, or it's just seem to be an isolated civilization?
I think in the ancient past that there was really a lot of interaction from a lot of long lost civilizations, and that there was not just one civilization in one part of the world. There were numerous lost civilizations at any one time, and they were interacting. There's direct evidence at Stonehenge with a particular style of crafts that they were interacting with ancient Egypt, for example. In fact, the skulls of the Neolithic that I discovered at Stonehenge are almost, Billy, identical to the long skull of Egypt. Cannot be coincidental. And that is a fact. And if we go to Malta, for example, the skulls are identical. So I see this as a kind of lost race that probably was worldwide, and association with different cultures as well.
Wow, incredible. Yeah, it always seems that these ancient cultures, they had a way of communicating and traveling that we still can't understand today. We see the interaction between so many cultures globally and so many similarities between their construction techniques. I don't know if you knew about this, but in Lake Michigan in America, they discovered a henge. Yeah. And on some of the stones, one of the stones is a mastodon etched into the stone. And there's other animals as well, but it's just mind-blowing that halfway around the world, in the middle of this lake in America, there's another henge. Somebody taught this standing stone technique. I don't know if it could be just a coincidence, but there's so many standing stones around. It just seems like somebody may have been teaching this technique. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've heard of, Lake Michigan, and even if you use LiDAR, I'm qualified in interpreting LiDAR. It can go through trees, it can go through sand, and it can show you what went before, so to speak. And if you fly that over the Amazon and you look there, again, you have in Peru henges that have now tree cover all over them. So yes, this was a long lost technology. And what one of my discoveries about standing stones was, and this goes back about 10 or so years, that particular points on a standing stone, there are 5 above ground, 2 below, which I've always equated to the chakras. Well, one of those high energy bands, it's like a point that releases energy. That's the easiest way to see it. Well, that sends a signal, which we recorded, to the next stone circle, which sends a signal to the next stone circle. And we have proved this. And that is, and I always call it this, it's Neolithic Wi-Fi. There's no wires. There's energy being traveled over. And again, I think that was used as much as a carrier wave as anything else. So stone circles across the British Isles, and 1,000 survive throughout the British Isles today. There would have been thousands and thousands of them. Many have been lost in recent times. They are all connected in this Wi-Fi network. And that's, again, long lost technology. And I think if that was occurring in the British Isles, it was occurring with the obelisks in ancient Egypt, in monuments in Mexico, for example. And that's quite factual because we got the frequency. But more than that, I think that the ancients could encode. We've heard about sound, how the light can change standing stones to release ultrasound. I also think that they could have been programmed, and this is how master dowsers see it, with a particular program, so that if you're tapping the stone, it's been found recently that you're kind of jarring its crystal lattice. And I think that could be programmed again to release sound and even images. One thing I noticed about taking people to ancient sites worldwide, and especially stone circles, is that there's sometimes a fleeting corner of the eye image that can be associated with standing stones. And that's where I think the ancients were programming. There's a long mythology in the British Isles of at the winter solstice, the god Apollo leaves his residence at Delphi, which is an oracle temple in ancient Greece, and resides and manifests at the heart of Stonehenge. And that has been written in all ancient British almanacs, like calendars. Apollo arrives at Stonehenge, as if you could see some kind of deity released from the energies within the stones themselves. Some people may say that's quite fantastic, but certainly I have seen corner of the eye images coming out of stones.
Wow, that's incredible. Wow. I'm learning a lot today about Stonehenge. I knew a little bit about it because I've researched it lightly, not as in depth as you. You've been there so many times, and I almost had a chance to go there with you a couple of times, but things just didn't work out. But I'm looking forward to definitely coming there on a very special setup, preset visit, just to have you take us out there and investigate and research these areas. Do you think that they may have been able to utilize that energy for some type of technology, or other than communication and maybe these holographic images? Do you think there were any potential other uses for the energy besides healing? Also, I'm sure there was probably healing.
Yeah, I think there was. I always say to people, Stonehenge is multifaceted. It's not one thing. It does a variety of different things, like most ancient sites do. And I think if the ancients could harness this, it's in the electromagnetic spectrum for example, and it could be turned into, you know, a different type of energy that was utilized. And I think they did that time and time again, because when we look at the sun, for example, it's said to release 7 colors of the electromagnetic spectrum, isn't it? From red through to violet, and people associate that with the chakras and particular properties associated with that. In Dowsing terms, there are 13 colors of the sun that resonate. Each one can be a positive frequency or a negative frequency. And when we look at Earth energies and how the sun interacts with that, we see it in terms of color. And each of those different color frequencies can do different things, from communication to storage of energy has been proposed, for example. So it's utilizing the electromagnetic spectrum within stones and those extra colors that reside in the colors of the sun as well. So we see Earth energies as being a multitude of color that can be utilized and used, for example.
Yeah. Wow. That's incredible. I know a few years ago, I was on a TV series on the Travel Channel. I think it was called America's Mysteries or something like that. I've been on so many shows, but they were talking about Stonehenge, and it came up briefly during the show, and it was talking about the fact that, not the fact, but the hypothesis that it could also be a portal or portal technology. Have you heard anything about that?
Yes, I was with on the History Channel with the UFO hunters many years ago, and we were looking into the fact of, you know, portals and stargates and vortices, for instance, because one of the lesser known facts about Stonehenge that I've been purporting for, you know, more than 15 years now, it is surrounded by 16 military sites. That's fact number one. The Salisbury Plain equates to Area 51. You cannot go into that military zone, for instance. And wherever you tend to have military activity, you can have a major power center like Stonehenge. And at its heart, where those 2 altar stones were that I have researched, that is where you have a very powerful vortex. And where all of those lintels created a circle around Stonehenge, I think that contained that energy. And that's lost now because some of those lintels were dismantled in history. They didn't necessarily fall. It was almost like there was an energy surge at one point, and so some of the stone settings at Stonehenge were literally dismantled and taken down.
Wow. That's something similar to what I believe happened in certain parts of Egypt as well, in the Osirian, at a place called Elephantine Island. Several other places we see this this explosion of energy. In some way, it seems like energy expanded and some type of fusion took place, or some type of energy came out of these areas and knocked everything over. And in a lot of cases, it seems like some of these sites, these ancient sites, have been decommissioned in some way. Like the Grand Gallery leading up to the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid, you can see the slots on the sides going up, but the rods that were in those slots, which have been hypothesized to be resonating rods, seem to have been removed. And the apex to some of these pyramids have been taken away. Sites like Stonehenge seems to have been, the technology seems to have been dismantled in some way. So what do you think? Do you have any theories on this dismantling or decommissioning of these ancient sites?
Exactly. I think there was an overload in prehistoric times. And in England, when I looked to what was happening in the geological record, for example, what happened round about the time it was probably dismantled, there was a huge drop in temperature by a sudden 1 degree, and everybody left the Salisbury Plain. Now, what caused that? You could say, oh, yes, it was this, it was that, it was, you know, a natural, but could that sudden climate change have been caused by something in occurrence at Stonehenge? That's where I'm going. I think it even affected the climate around the area. And we know this because of tree records in the circles within trees when they're cut down. We know it because there was peat bogs in certain parts of the British Isles. So that did actually happen. They abandoned Stonehenge and then headed to the hills and created a monument called a Druid hill fort, a henge type of monument. And so that was definitely in the record. And I don't think that was natural. I don't think it was down to climate change. I think it was down to megalithic overload change.
Wow, incredible. I saw on the History Channel, I think it might have been Ancient Aliens. I saw some huge standing stones in the UK going out in these lines. Do you know where that location is located? Where that's at?
Yes, that's going to be in the north of England. They're called the Devil's Arrows. They were called the Devil's Arrows probably in the 16th century because prior to that, they were called the Main Stones. 16th century went crazy with the witch trial hunts over here. Everything became the devil this, the devil that. Yes, they are very, very, very tall. And they are, I believe, part of a much larger avenue of stones, which I think were much bigger than what we see today. And the tallest monolith in the British Isles is not that far from those Devil's Arrows. It's called the Rudstone Monolith. That is huge, about 27 feet above ground and 27 feet below ground. In the Victorian era, around about the early 19th century, for example, they capped it with lead. So at this moment in time, it's capped. And that's a strange, quirky fate for one of our largest producing energy stones to be capped.
Yeah. With lead? They use lead? Wow.
They use lead. And the same as some of the powerful stones at Stonehenge, they are capped underneath themselves with lead, is a fact.
That's interesting because when scientists and anthropologists and archaeologists come across different things, whether it's stones, building construction materials, or even bones, they will, if they have a higher than background level radiation signature, they will paint them in lead to keep the radiation in. This is in museums. Like if you go to the museum in America and there's bones there, sometimes those dinosaur bones are radioactive, so they paint them in lead to hide the radioactive signal or frequency. So I'm wondering if they are doing the same thing with lead on those stones to somehow block the energy from coming out.
That's a really good point, and certainly one that I will investigate. That's quite inspiring. In all probability, I think so, because they were definitely trying to calm these ancient sites down. Now, round about Orthodox dating, round about 1100 BC, some say 1500 BC, every single stone circle in the British Isles was abandoned. Okay. Now that takes something really major to get you out of what you normally do. It's like saying all of a sudden, nobody go shopping, nobody do this, nobody do that. And yet everybody just left and abandoned that. And I think, again, that was down to all of these stones, like I said earlier, in utter communication to one another. Like I said, I've proved the frequencies of that. So if one stone circle like Stonehenge starts to have a high frequency and a high resonance, it's going to affect every single stone circle across the British Isles because they're all connected through their energy bands, for example. So what happens in one place, and Stonehenge was the spiritual capital of the British Isles, everybody went there from worldwide, as isotope teeth enamel tests have attested. And that's where I think the whole of the British Isles, megalithics across Ireland, across Scotland, were influenced by Stonehenge.
Absolutely. I wonder, I just recently came back from Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, and I'm wondering if there's a connection between Stonehenge and those ancient sites, just because they are standing stones built. They're more like columns, but built in a circular fashion. Do you think there's any connection there?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, a lot of people say, for example, that's the oldest site, 12,000 years old, has been mooted time and time again about those two ancient Turkish sites. But when we look to one particular monument in the British Isles, called Silbury Hill. It's the largest man-made mound in Northwest Europe. For example, beneath that grass round mound appearance is a 7-step ziggurat pyramid, is again an archaeological fact. And a colleague of mine who felt that there was a kind of extraterrestrial link to Silbury Hill and Turkey, some of the Turkish sites, for example, he had an independent carbon dating done, which from the inside of Silbury Hill. The archaeologist there, Jim Leary, is very famous for being the mound so-called expert. I don't think he's an expert, but there you go. That's what he purports. He took a sample, Billy, and my friend John Cowie took a sample. It came back, his sample, independently tested, 12,000 BC. So some of these sites in the British Isles have been misdated by orthodox archaeology. And I was inspired by that because there's a direct ley line. I've been studying ley lines for 30 years now. There's a direct line to those sites. In Turkey cannot be coincidental. But more than that, if we imagine that Silbury Hill, this massive mound, is built in layers of organic material and non-organic, organic, non-organic, well, you've got the famous Wilhelm Reich orgone accumulator there. That's how it's been built on internally. And I purported that if you put a gold kind of staff in the top, if you will, a bit like what the pyramids were said to have contained gold on the top, for example, and you had this rod of gold or copper, any conductive material would suffice. I tested the electrostatic frequencies at the bottom of Silbury Hill to its electrostatic field at the top. It was 1,000 times greater. And with that layering inside, alongside an engineer that I have been working with for many years, we realized that what was happening if it had that kind of rod in it, it would build up the electrostatic field in the day, and then at night, because it was white chalk originally, you see it as grassed over. It was a beautiful white chalk monument, just like the pyramids had a limestone white veneer, if you will. Then because of its whiteness and releasing of the electrostatic field, it would actually glow blue along its top and down its side. So all of those mounds are beacon mounds that would be lighting up the night in natural kind of electricity, if you will. And that has been captured in a few photographs where the vestiges of that technology have been captured. And why doesn't it do it all today? One, it is in white. Two, it's been so had archaeological dig after dig, it's destroyed its internal makeup, for example. So again, I see monuments very differently to how we think we know them today.
Yeah, that's incredible. Silbury Hill is a very powerful place, and you're right. It's a gigantic orgone pyramid there underneath that mound. And that whole area there in Avebury, UK, has a striking, coincident, I guess, similarity to a place on Mars called Cydonia. So if you go to the European Space Agency website, right, you get the Cydonia map and you get the Avebury, UK ordnance map and download it. You can overlay the two once you scale them, and they match with Silbury Hill and the other anomalies that have been man-made at Avebury. They perfectly align with the five-sided pyramid and the face on Mars and another structure they call the city at Cydonia, on Mars, which is just wild.
Absolutely. I have worked with Richard Hoagland, who came out with the Cydonia theory way back. He even worked as a consultant for NASA. And we have been working with Mars for quite some time. And more than that, Billy, what we also, this is Richard Hoagland and myself with a team, or we do a radio show, every other week about Mars and Apollo. There was a stone circle found on the moon, for instance, and Richard said to me, can you match it perfectly to any other stone circle in the British Isles? And I said, I will certainly look into that for you, which I did. But it wasn't just one stone circle. It was stone circle after stone circle after stone circle started matching that lunar stone circle by its exact diameter to how many stones it was. So I think that, again, it's the moon and it is Mars. And there's been a lot of talk at the moment about Mars and that very square shape that has been discovered and re-looked at. And we're investigating that at the moment.
Nice. Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, there are so many anomalies on Mars that I've looked at, and I've helped discover some with my United Family of Anomaly Hunters, that I just know for a fact in my heart, based on the research, that not only was there an advanced civilization on Mars, but it ran concurrently with the civilization on Earth. And this is also talked about in the ancient Sumerian tablets, where they have these beings in the tablets called the Igigi, and they were the working class. And they were, according to the tablets, not according to me, they were working on Mars and Earth at the same time, doing the labor, creating cities, creating irrigation, clearing out fields, and building canals, and all these incredible things. And I just find it hard to believe that so many thousands of years ago, somebody who was supposed to be a hunter-gatherer trying to make sure they could be protected and bring the village food had time to sit back and write a sci-fi movie on stone. I think that they wrote what they saw or what they knew, not a sci-fi Star Trek movie 5 to 10,000 years ago. So I think there's I believe that it's credible information, and I believe that these things really did happen. And just based on the anomalies and all the incredible connections that you're finding, I really do believe that at one point in the past, we, either human beings or a version of us or another version of a hominid at some point, the ancients called them the Inuna, somebody had advanced technology, and somebody was going back and forth, I believe, between Earth, the moon, and Mars, with this blueprint for these incredible stone circles and standing stones and advanced stone technology that we're still trying to figure out today. It's just incredible.
Absolutely. That's the same conclusion that both Richard and I have come to in looking at very closely these different types of stone circles based, elsewhere. And also what I did for the moon and the Apollo stone circle, that was coined a phrase, the Apollo stone circle, because Apollo 12 landed quite close to it. And what we noticed was, if you project the lay of going through the Great Pyramid on the Giza Plateau, for example, and then you go very down, it goes to Abydos and further on besides to the Nubian pyramids, for example, and you place that on that particular site, it matches up to that latitude, everything. So I think they were looking for the latitude and the longitude on one place and then reconstructing it on Earth, possibly at a much later date. We think they are so thousands and thousands of years old. They're beyond our comprehension.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, you've done a great job researching this information, and a great service to humanity, because I really do believe that the secret to our future is hidden and locked in our past. A lot of people always say, well, why do you always focus on the ancient past? Why are you worrying about that? We have to worry about tomorrow and what's coming next. I said, well, if we don't know what happened back then, we're going to continue to make the same mistakes in the future. We have to know the truth as close as we can get to it, so we can see who we really are, what truly happened, and how we can create a better future for humanity. So people like yourself, and I don't call you, I've heard somebody call you once one of the greatest female researchers in ancient civilizations. I'll call you one of the greatest female researchers in the world, but not just female, as a human being, you're one of the greatest. I mean, female is one title, but overall, as a person, I think, there's no way a person can be a female and a man, and you got to give them two different recognition levels. I think that you're at the very top with everyone else.
Well, thank you very much. It's a bit of I suppose, like with you, Billy, I got in this from a very young age to try and solve a mystery. It was like this great mystery that I wanted to solve, and I'm sure your listeners are like that. And one thing that I did learn is that, no one author has all the answers. Together, we can all write the chapters of the past. Yeah. And everybody contributes to that. And I always like to inspire listeners and saying, if you've got a passion, if you've got what you think is a key to unlocking that door of the past, then walk forward and start to unlock it, because these journeys take us to very many different countries and to look at amazing artifacts worldwide, as I'm sure you have done in your journey, Billy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Isn't it so beautiful to travel the world and see these places and do the research in the field, like right there, live and in living color, not just from Google? I mean, how do you feel when you travel to these places?
Well, what I really do love is it's stepping in the footsteps of the ancestors, those that went before. And just by physically touching those granite walls in the king's chamber, I'm touching that very same wall that my ancestors did. And it gives me a direct link to the past in psychometry, in attuning to the place, and into visionary realms as well. So that's what I like, literally stepping in their footsteps and asking, what happened, asking all of the questions and trying to answer them. I don't think I've answered all the questions that I've asked of the ancient world yet, but I'm still seeking answers to the kind of understanding of what really happened in the past, and to allow a narrative to be put forward. And I know you're a pioneer in this, Billy, and a narrative to be put forward that challenges orthodox archaeology from the get-go.